Sydney Showgrounds very happy to be presenting the next session. Patrick Kidd was appointed the CEO of the Invictus Games Sydney 2018 back in early 2017. He was on secondment from Deloitte. Patrick has been there since 2015 after 30 years of experience in the armed forces both over in the UK and here in Australia. He's had extensive experience in delivering high complexity, multinational and diverse teams with multiple stakeholders. He's here to tell the story from the inside, from planning, winning the bid, delivering, and of course the aftermath of the Games. Please welcome Patrick Kidd.
Good morning, and Dwayne, thank you very much indeed for your really kind welcome, and actually, thank you very much indeed for having me along to talk to you. I'm sort of slightly humbled, I have to say, by the incredible people that are here, the incredible people that just sat down there, but also a little bit smug. I am a CEO, but I'm in that unique position whereby I'm a CEO of an event that's been delivered. We didn't kill anybody. I didn't have to go back to government and ask for any more money, and so generally it's been viewed as a success. And so I'm listening to their stories and thinking, well, you just got it coming around all over again, so good luck to you. But it's a really nice position to sort of sit here now and talk to you from a position where I've just come back from a long holiday with my family. That was a bloody event. That was good. And to reflect on sort of what we achieved and I suppose some of the lessons that come from it. And I think today what I'd like to try and do is to give you a completely frank view of some of the things that went well, some of the things that didn't go quite so well, but also to talk about what the event was and why it was important. And the theme that you'll get throughout this next 30-minute session is one very much of the fact that I'm a soldier by trade. 30 years I was in the military. Every event I did in the military really had a purpose behind it. And, soldiering is not dissimilar to events. It's about coordinating people in time and space and delivering an impact, achieving something. So the skill sets that you need, the types of people, funny enough, events people and soldiers, sailors and airmen are remarkably similar people. It's amazing. There are strong parallels. And so for me, when I think about an event, I'm not remotely interested in an event that just is staged for one day. What I'm interested in is events that can drive change and have an impact. And that's why I thought it was so good to hear Teresa talk today on the stage about what they do with the Mardi Gras, because that's an event that is driving change. And I think that the opportunity that this industry has is to not just deliver great events, but it can drive change, it can bring people together, it can make an impact. And that's a great opportunity as we sort of move forward into 2019 and beyond. If we always think about things through that prism, I reckon we're going to be a much better country in a much better place. The Games itself, Invictus, is a Latin word that means unconquered, and that word intrinsically talks to what these games are all about. The games use the power of sport to inspire people's recovery and their rehabilitation. The people that participate in the games are individuals who have been wounded on operational service, they become ill during their service in their nation's military, or they become sick. It's about physical health and well-being, it's about mental health and well-being. So often those two things are combined. But the fundamental idea of the Games is about inspiring people to move forward with their lives through the simple idea of being physically active. And when you become physically active, you connect with other people. And when you're connected with other people, all of a sudden you are on the road to a healthy and better balanced life within which, in terms of how you conduct yourselves. And I am so completely convinced by what I've seen over the last 4 years. I've seen lives change. I've seen people whose lives have been saved by their engagement with these games and what these games stand for. And so through the Invictus Games, people have been impacted, not just who've served in the military, but impacted across the community about what they can do. People's eyes have been opened about the opportunities and the potential that they can achieve. And so this, as an event, bearing in mind the events that I'm sure many of you here have run that are massive in different ways, this is a small event, but its impact was huge, and it is playing through now as we speak. It's not about elite sport. So whilst it's about sport, the competition, it's not really about sport. You know, it's not about the medals. We give medals, but we don't really care how many medals each nation gets, or even if a person gets a medal. You know, it's actually about participation. So the person who comes last is celebrated as much as the person who comes first. It's about the families that support the people who compete, because the two things are together. So it's about teamwork. It's about trying to inspire people through stories. It's about the telling of stories, and then it's about changing life through that. So I'm going to play you a video. We do some, in this presentation there are some slides, there's some great videos. There are some good slides and there's some really average slides. The average slides I did last night. The good slides are great slides, so just bear with me, but they are what I think, so I hope they're helpful. So this video is a good video, and it's the poem that's recited. Every single person that you see in this video is somebody whose life has been impacted by service in their nation's military. And whenever I give a presentation about these games, I ask us all to stop and reflect, because these games honour the sacrifice of 102,000 Australians who have sacrificed their lives on behalf of our nation and whose names are on the War Memorial in Canberra. They celebrate and recognise 300,000 veterans and their families who live within our communities today. And in particular, for me, as I look back 4 months after the event, they're an absolute celebration of the 500 competitors and the 1,200 or so family and friends that came along to be a part of the Games and what they achieved in October in Sydney last year. So hopefully this works.
Out of the night that covers me.
Black as a pit from pole to pole.
I thank whatever gods may be.
My unconquerable soul.
In the fell clutch of circumstance.
I'm Rollins, not quite allowed.
Under the bludgeonings of chance.
My head is bloody, but I'm bowed.
Beyond this place of wrath and tears
looms but the horror of the shade.
And yet, the menace of the years.
Find and shall find me, unafraid.
It matters not how straight the gate.
How charge of punishments, the scroll.
I am the master of my fate.
I am the captain of my soul.
I am the captain of my soul.
I am the captain of my soul.
So real people whose lives have been changed by their experience with sport and with the Invictus ideals over a period of time. So that's it, sort of as a summary on the wall. It's 18 nations. It is, in our case, it aimed to be 500, slightly dropped down to 490 competitors. We call them competitors. We don't call them athletes, because it's not about being elite. It's just about being there. 13 different sports. 13 different sporting venues. There were actually about 24 venues that have to be managed over that 7-day period. The family and friends. So that for us was a core client group. You know, success was about making sure that the competitors had a great time, took part in great activities, but the family and friends and their experience was as important as that. So it was all about creating this moment, this bubble, whereby these individuals derived incredible power from being a part of it. The volunteers were equally as much a part of that, you know, in terms of making sure that their experience of this thing was, for them, a powerful one, a positive one. And by bringing together this community, you know, what Dwayne talked to, you know, what we delivered at the Olympic Park, which can be a pretty soulless place, was the most extraordinary atmosphere over a 7-day period, whereby people were like genuinely happy to be there and be a part of something positive. You know, that was an overwhelming sense of a community doing something together. One mascot. My God, mascots are brilliant. You know, they bring so much out of things if you can sort of get a good mascot that does stuff. And we had a bunch of assistance dogs and changed policy within Australia about the value and the role played by assistance dogs in supporting people who've got mental illness. So that was sort of it by number. The sports. So we talk a lot about the sports. There were 13 sports, and you know, on the face of it, when you look at a slide like this, it really shouldn't be that difficult. You know, it's like 13 sports: turn up, play your sport, move on. But the challenge of this Games was the fact that what's most important was the competitor's experience. So If a competitor said, I wanted to come along and do not just one sport, I want to do 7 sports, we had to create a schedule that enabled that person to do 4, 5 or 6 sports. 491 competitors. Of 491 competitors, 360 of them decided to do indoor rowing. 330 of them wanted to do the athletics. And so if you can just think about the complexity of trying to manage a program of events with absolutely at the forefront of your mind the experience of that individual to make sure that their interaction with that event was going to be the best it could possibly be, you can start to get a sense as to how complicated the schedule was. I think by the end of it, there were probably 27 iterations of the sporting schedule before we could eventually lock it down into something that was reasonable. And the quality of the sport that had to be presented had to be of a international level. So it's not just like turning up to a children's sports day at school. You know, this is about trying to do something that is as good as a world championship event, with the quality of the people that are there, with the look and the feel of it, with the way in which the whole thing is conducted. And so it was a really, really complicated event. If I was to say to you that there were 24 venues that had to be managed, on top of that there were another 54 events that we ran over the 7 days of the period of the Games. So in total, what the team had to manage was 54 different things happening over 7 days. Some of them were about sport, some of them were about making sure people could go to a great opening ceremony or a closing ceremony. Some of those things were about creating breakfasts on each of the days that talked about the social impact we were trying to achieve. But everything was an event and everything had to be managed. And that was done with a staff, a workforce of about 142 plus 1,000 volunteers. And so when we think about what the Games were, you know, for us it was about squeezing the absolute most that you possibly could with this moment in time that you've got. You've got Harry, you've got Meghan, you've got the eyes of the world on Australia. So your obligation is to deliver the absolute best you possibly can, because you only get it once. Have no regrets. I'll come back to this always. You know, this sat at the centre. This is one of my slides, by the way, you can probably tell. You know, this sits at the centre. You know, it's this. The fact was that this was about people, and it was about trying to support a certain type of person who comes from a certain part of our community to assist them. You know, that picture on the right-hand side is of a guy called Sergeant Barry. He was a soldier in the First World War, and he took part in something called the Inter-Allied Games in 1919 whilst he was being demobilised back in the United Kingdom. He was in the 100-yard freestyle swimming race, able-bodied and disabled, and he won it with one leg. You know, that spirit of that person, you know, 101 years ago is extraordinary. And the nature of these people is no different to what they are now, from 100 years ago to where they are now. The guy at the top there is a guy called Curtis McGrath, who is an extraordinary individual who was blown up in Afghanistan about 5 years ago. When he gets onto the chopper, he literally is he's asking, he was a mine clearer. He'd lost both of his legs. And he asked how his legs were, and he was told by the medics on the helicopter that his legs were effectively have gone. He's clearly on morphine at the time, but he says, that's fantastic, he goes. He says, because in 4 years' time, there'll be the Rio Paralympics, and I'll go there and I'll get myself a gold medal. And so through Invictus, he starts his program of recovery and rehabilitation. And in Rio, he goes and gets a gold medal in canoeing. He's now defended his world championship title 3 times. And he is an extraordinary individual. But that's an example of the spirit that goes into these people. The picture down in the bottom left is of another guy called Adrian Talbot. He served with the British Army as well as being an Australian in the British Army, and he got post-traumatic stress after 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. But I put his picture there because he's also been to the Invictus Games. His life was also transformed. But the power of that transformation was not just on him, but it was on his family. And so his wife and his children, they all derive this incredible benefit because of the impact that these games had for that individual. So whenever I think about the games, and there's 54 different events, trying to do all this stuff, trying to squeeze the juice out of it, the thing that kept us honest in every respect was, what are we about? What are we trying to achieve? And it's those people that drove us in every single respect. That's what gave us our strong point of reference. Whenever there's a decision about money, resources, time, energy, effort, it's those people that helped us to sort of stay focused, because you're trying to do something that, most simply, is about maximising their moment in time so that they have a great time, and everything built from that. The Games was more than the Games, and I hope that I've been able to communicate that already. But, you know, we had a really clear sense as to an impact from the Games. And having that impact was so important for so many different reasons. You know, you couldn't raise money because people don't want to give money to a sporting event anymore. You know, they want to give money to things that they think are going to make a difference in the community. And so having a clear sense of self as to what we were trying to do was a really fundamental part of raising the revenue that we needed to deliver the Games. It was a really important part of bringing the community together around the Games. And our theory was always around this idea of delivering a great Games on behalf of those competitors and the families and friends that go with it. But then around this idea of what are we trying to achieve? You know, what are those legacy impacts that we're trying to get to? So on the first hand, it's about health and well-being. It was always about encouraging people to be physically active and to be connected with other people socially. And by doing that, you address physical health and well-being, you address mental health and well-being, and that was very much the core of it. The stories that come out of that rehabilitation that people have undertaken inspire other people. You know, 1 in 5 Australians have some form of disability, be it mental or physical. 3 in 5 Indigenous Australians have got a disability. So trying to reach out and inspire that broader community was always a part of what it was we were trying to do. We talk about education. So it was about educating people about the role of the military within our society and why it's important and the challenges that they face, but also educating people about the health and well-being aspects of life. We're trying to shift perceptions. And so there we partnered with the Department of Education in New South Wales, who put on the most incredible education program. 11,000 students, school children, came to the Games. 48,000 school children interacted with the online learning platform that was created by the Department of New South Wales during the Games. You know, that is an extraordinary set of numbers. If only half of those people were inspired to do something longer term as a result of having interacted with our Games in that way, that is a lot of children, 6,000 children at least, who are being inspired to do something different than they would otherwise have done. And then at the top right, we talk about employment, because from a veteran's perspective, one of the biggest challenges we have is, and I'm a soldier of 30 years, so I believe this clearly, you know, the challenge that we so often have is how you transition from a certain type of environment into another environment, and how you do it well, and how you find your way to doing employment that has a sense of purpose, that allows you to earn enough money to give you a sense of self-worth that keeps your family sort of in the right place. And so often we find that the thing that begins to unravel and unravels first is their inability to get work that is appropriate for where their skill sets, their characters when they leave the military. And when that happens, that's when the mental challenges start to happen. 85 veterans committed suicide last year in Australia. 200 veterans commit suicide every single day in the United States of America. You know, those are confronting figures about health and well-being within this particular community. So those are the legacy initiatives that we tried to stimulate. We tried to educate people about people's potential. The Games was never about feeling sorry for people. It's always about celebrating. It's about celebrating people's spirit, the unconquered spirit. And when you think about it from the perspective of employment, you know, if you can change people's perception about what it is somebody can do, not what they can't do, then all of a sudden you start to change the way in which people are thought about, their potential opportunities within our workplace. And that was very much what these Games was about. It's about showcasing and focusing around ability over disability. And it's those stories that then inspire a broader community. And we saw that happen day in, day out at the Games itself, but more broadly besides. The Games, our Games, couldn't have been done without some incredible partners. And we had 3 categories of partners. We had founding partners, which involved the New South Wales government, for example, the federal government, New South Wales clubs, who were, again, an incredible partner, and Deloitte, and I'll come back to them in just a second. We had commercial partners, different levels, all of that stuff you'll normally understand, and we had communications partners. Our communications partners were about providing us arms and legs to communicate with the community. So because we were small, we couldn't do it ourselves. We needed others to do that with. So we aligned ourselves with aligned organisations, Beyond Blue, Are You OK, ex-service charities, and we used them to try and amplify our message. The commercial partners, to an absolute, every single one of them, were not remotely interested in rights in a traditional sense. They wanted to be recognised, but what they really wanted was to be a part of something that they thought was good and was going to have an impact. And so that takes you back to this idea of legacy. You know, if you have a strong narrative around the legacy, the commercial partners are much more prepared to have a conversation about what it is they can do. There are more ways of accessing funds and resources. The founding partners were the people who fundamentally took the risk to set the thing up from the outset, to drive it through. And that was government, and that's what government should do. It's a worthy cause. It fits in with a bunch of policies, but you know, government fundamentally it's their responsibility, I think, in that area, and they took it on beautifully. Deloitte chose to do it because they wanted to do something that they thought was right. And they asked for no benefits or no rights, but they effectively put in a bunch of staff, of which I was one of them, and we carried it from the bidding phase all the way through to the delivery phase. And that consistency and continuity over time really is how we were able to deliver this thing, was because you had people who continue to drive it when there is no money, which is always the hard piece of any event, is at the early stages before you start to generate the revenue. So the partners were incredible, and they were absolutely delivery partners. You know, New South Wales government were extraordinary in terms of the support that they put into this, and the Games wouldn't have happened without them, no doubt about it. The Games in a snapshot. So, what did we achieve? The Games were watched by 8.7 million Australians. It was the second most watched programme that the ABC, who are our broadcast partner, have ever put on. Unbelievable. It says a lot about how they presented it, how they showed it, the stories that they told, a strategy of telling those stories over time, but an absolute incredible sort of pick-up rate and engagement rate from them and from Australia. It changed perceptions about how you behave. So, you know, when we did our analysis after the event, you know, people were aware of what our sponsors had done, were more open to our sponsors as a result of their engagement with the Games itself. So that was powerful in its own right. It changed behaviours. You know, we changed people's perspectives about what it was these people could do, not what they couldn't do. People were more willing to think about people and employing those people because of what they'd seen and what they'd witnessed, and that's exactly what we were trying to achieve. We raised awareness about mental health and well-being and post-traumatic stress and what that meant. So we got to those objectives. Only time will tell whether or not these changes, the awareness that we've shifted will have a long-term impact, but certainly in terms of creating that initial start point went beautifully. You know, it was really, really good. And we also inspired a bunch of initiatives because it was the moment in time that the Games presented. So the government decided to do stuff that they wouldn't otherwise normally do. They launched a grant of $50 million to go into creating a hospital at Concord, which is focused upon veterans' mental health issues. The Department of Sport talked about and committed to the creation of a national sport event every 2 years for veterans and other people in the first responder community, which is an adaptive sports event. So that's a great thing. We created an organisation called Veteran Sports Australia, which is around trying to pull together that community of people, the 300,000 people, and provide them somewhere to go to be physically active and to be connected. On the turn of a dial, government policy shifted around assistance dogs because of the experience of what ministers saw when they came to the Games. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes out of it. You know, the University of New South Wales created an alumni scholarship for veterans serving. You know, brilliant little initiatives that happened that when you add it all together, make a real difference. The challenge, of course, is how do you then maintain that momentum as you go forward? And so that very much is about trying to pass across the baton. But I think in terms of our moment in time and what we were able to achieve, I think we got to the impact that we were trying to get to. You can always do more, but I'm happy that we got to where we got to. So that's the Games. And then I sort of get to, I suppose, some insights that may or may not be interesting. I suspect that most of you know all this stuff because of the industry that you come from, but having done 4 years with the Games, I sort of quickly came to a conclusion that, you know, being a CEO of a Games like this is all about compromise. It's about those 3 bits of the triangle. It's about producing plans that enable you to deliver a great Games, which you can only produce if you've got good people, and then making sure you get the right contractors, the right services on board. And the challenge is about how do you do that in a balanced way, bearing in mind you've got no money. And we struggled over a 3.5-year period to get into this understanding of the fact that the plan is as good as your people and has to be done at the right time. But only when you linked it up were you able to really get into a point whereby you got to the right sort of detail within the tender to get the right services. And all things had to be managed. And at the end of the day, it's always a compromise. It's a compromise about budget, it's a compromise about service levels or otherwise. But you and your role as a CEO is to manage that process, to make sure that you stay focused upon the prize, but you build yourself in a balanced, coherent way. But the other part, you know, that's the event bit. But the other part, when I think about it from my role, is around the legacy. You know, I probably spent 20% to 30% of my time thinking and driving legacy. Because if I didn't, nobody else would. So that was a core part of my role. And then the other 20 to 30% is about stakeholders. You know, this was, when you think about the partners that we had on board, you know, this was all about a partnership of people who weren't quite sure what they were getting into, and confidence was the most important thing. And so managing their expectations, managing their needs was, again, from my perspective, was a really core part of the role. So when I look at that, I reckon I spent 30% on legacy, 30% on the event, 30% on managing stakeholders. The money, about $30 million. Most of that you can't really change. It's deliberately, so it's quite big now, but that sort of shows you where it is. Workforce is the big piece. And I suspect there's opportunity to sort of change and to adjust the workforce numbers as you know, if you had more experience, you could take stuff out of that. You know, we're a one-off event, and so we had to sort of learn as we went. But it's interesting, I think, those numbers. The rest of it pretty much is what it is. The biggest challenge you have is integration. So the language of a complex multi-sport event is around functional areas. I'm sure that's a language that you understand. But in our world, what we really struggle with, this bit on the right is all the stuff that you do early, and it's pretty straightforward. That stuff on the left is all the stuff you do in the last 2 or 3 months. And the biggest challenge of that is integrating it. And so you end up in a position, because you are fighting the schedule, you end up in a position whereby you bring on lots of people in all those functional areas. They don't integrate very well. They don't share information very well. And so you spend more money than you should do. You struggle to bring the whole thing together. And you introduce risk into the project. And so when I look at it in terms of, if I had my time again, what would I do? I'd be looking at that bit on the left and I'd be thinking about how I would organise that differently, how I'd simplify that, how I'd get the right people on earlier to reduce the risk in those areas. But events people are a certain type of people. They come from a certain background, and sometimes they struggle to think broadly. They tend to think like that. And that's a challenge that has to be integrated. And all of you who deliver those events, like Andrew and Teresa, you know, you'll know it each and every year. You've got to bring those people in, you've got to integrate them to get them online and on purpose. Events, it seems to me, are pretty straightforward. You know, it's a series of steps that you've got to go through. A lot of those steps are standard, and yet we seem to make it difficult for ourselves each time. And so I suspect there's ways of making and saving money by looking at those steps of the process to make sure that you've got a common approach that you can apply. And I think most events can do it in the same way. So I don't think it's hard. I think the event landscape is changing. You know, it's a fragmented industry. You know, traditionally you don't work together very well. You all do little things, you don't look at the whole thing, and I think there's real opportunity there to do good work by bringing it together. Lots of small companies doing their stuff, protecting their IP, you know, that again isn't helpful when you're an event organiser, when you're trying to work out which way you go and who you partner with. We generate so much data in an event, unbelievable, and we don't harness any of it. You know, we don't manage it properly. We don't get it to, you know, we don't use it in the way that we might, that will save us time and save us effort. We've talked about social impact, and we've talked about the fact the event is so much more than just the event, and that's opportunity for us. I'm over time, but I'm going to keep going. One last video.
The Invictus generation is defining what it means to serve. It's your privilege to watch in the stands or with your friends and families around the television. Show the world what Game On Down Under really means.
This is Invictus Games Sydney. All of this, all the people, all the kids cheering everyone on. It's amazing. And what these people all can do, it's bringing out a lot.
You're there to support everyone else, no matter if they're your team or not, if you met them or not. And that's what you think the spirit is.
Well, I don't care if I win a medal or not, as long as I finish the race.
I'm proud to be here, and it's a big honor to represent my nation.
Every minute has been just such a life-altering experience.
The Invictus Games for me is respect, camaraderie and mateship, and also to be always learning.
It's a celebration of the phenomenal human spirit.
This is my chance to course correct.
This is something great, something awesome, and this is new sport for me.
Get out of the house and take care of yourself and be the special person that you can be.
So be the special person you can be. I mean, that for me is the takeaway line from the Invictus Games Sydney last year. Last couple of comments. You know, an event is so much more than an event. You know, it can showcase great capability. It can inspire people to do things. It can change people's behaviours. It can change people's attitudes. And I think your industry's responsibility is to think like that. The ability to host a great event is the hallmark of a great nation. And we need to think big if we're going to do that. And I think you have a tremendous opportunity when you think about the types of events that you do to get back to legacy, to get back to impact, to really make a difference in a way that perhaps we haven't always done. Can I thank you again for your time? I'm sorry I've gone over time. And for people in this room who represent organisations that have supported us to deliver these games, you know, once again, I cannot overstate my thanks for the incredible support that we have from an incredible team of partners. And it was an absolute privilege to have been the Chief Executive of the Invictus Games Sydney. Thank you.
Patrick Kidd, ladies and gentlemen. Patrick Kidd! Wow, talk about impact, talk about empowering and what we can all do. Patrick, thank you for being a resemblance of that power through events, and thank you for everything that you do. Patrick Kidd, thank you.